Nobody really wants to admit it, but we all get old. And one of the things that happens when we get old is we start to sort of get set into particular paths. So in my case, I end up being a computer person, and I end up doing that because it's something that I've taken the time to learn, and people have asked me to do that sort of thing in the places that I've worked. This is just how things are. I spent my time learning from others, though much of it was not direct learning. I actually ended up doing things like looking things up on the internet and so forth in order to find out the things that I need. And that's a very good thing because it turns out that works well for that kind of work. But there's this concept of sort of discipleship in which one sort of learns the ideas of a particular thing for a period of time until they become somebody who actually knows how to do those things. And it's a reasonable idea. It's a totally reasonable idea. I've been a Christian for about 30 years now. I did the math the other day and I sort of came to that conclusion. It's a little longer, a couple more years maybe than that. But the point is, for the last 30 years or so, I've been a believer. And I'm not going to say that I've done anything like a perfect job in my belief as a Christian, but I think I've done okay. And I started life in certain senses in a sort of discipleship sort of place. It was less of a thing for me to be discipled by others, which is kind of a strange thing for a lot of people, but it's true. Yet and still it happened. There were people who would take me aside and guide me in the ways that I needed to go. And that still happens today. But the reality is, I think I'm sort of more in another class of human being today than I was before. I don't think everyone is intended to stay in a position of strong discipleship for the entirety of their walk as a Christian, or for that matter, in much of anything that they do. But we're going to talk particularly about Christianity today. So I think the way people use the word disciple today is almost as a person who is constantly beholden to someone else for what they do, say, and believe. And I don't think that that's a reasonable thing for anybody who's spent any period of time being some particular thing, whether it's a Christian or a computer programmer or whatever it happens to be. I don't think that that's something that you should probably spend huge amounts of time in. From the perspective of Christianity, there comes a point when one has to move from the spiritual milk to the spiritual meat. And this is Paul's expression, not my own, obviously. Paul, aka Saul of Tarsus, the guy people knew as Saul of Tarsus before his conversion experience on the Damascus Road. It's not that we're not disciples continually in our walk, but that we step into a place where it becomes our turn to disciple others, where we become what could be argued apostles or evangelists or any number of other things, right? Elders, any number of offices that we can come to hold. You never stop learning, obviously. You always continue to do that, and there will always be people who will show you things that you've missed or give you more perfect ways to deal with your world, your life as a believer. And again, this is always true, and regardless the pursuit, right? So again, as a software developer, I might learn how to do something, and somebody else might say, "Why on earth are you doing that like that? If you look at it, you really should be doing it like this. It's a much better, much more successful, much more reasonable and proper way to do things." The same thing is true for Christianity. You may learn something, and somebody may look at it and go, "Why on earth are you doing or saying that? This is not the reality." I heard somebody today talk about somebody else who was badly confused in what they were saying. And unfortunately, they made it a sort of a public thing when what they probably should have done was privately approach the individual if they had the ability to do so. But I get what they were doing. What they were doing wasn't just trying to help him. What they were doing was trying to help other people to see what that individual was doing and saying, and what was wrong, what was problematic, if you will, with what he was doing and saying. Here's the thing, though. When you look at people like Paul the Apostle, you begin to realize, when you look at Peter, when you look at many individuals, you begin to realize that those people started out in discipleship, and some of them directly under Jesus, under Christ, right? But in the end, they became, as it were, teachers. They became apostles. They became leaders, if you will. I don't really like the term leader because I think you're intended to be a servant, right? Not per se a leader. And I think Jesus made that quite plain when he said what he said and did what he did while he was on planet Earth. The point is to be not a follower per se, though a follower of Jesus, obviously, but to be a servant to your fellow man, right? Now, the question is, what is the best means by which a given individual might serve? And there are a number of ways that might be answered. I don't think probably Paul the Apostle in many instances would be considered. Now, you can argue that there was the tent maker aspect of his life, but I think in many aspects, in many ways, Paul would have been seen as a servant in that he spent his time helping others to understand those things that they did not get. And Paul would have told you, I'm pretty sure, besides that he says he didn't seem like a weighty individual when you saw him and when you dealt with him, and it was in his writings that he seemed to be a very grave person. Paul would have told you that there were parts of Christianity that were intentionally mysterious, that were not intended to be known or understood. But the thing about that is that does not mean that you stay a disciple and a disciple only for the time that you are in Christianity. And I think I could get into my how I look at the church. I could get into that. I'm going to save that for another time. I will tell you that I do believe the way the church is looked at today is not reasonable, that there are some people who think some things and that the things they think are not proper. And in fact, that's the majority of people who currently are believers, in my personal opinion. That said, I've said before, I think that the church is a useful thing. I think for Christianity, it can be unfortunately useful for other things as well. But the thing is, I believe it to be useful for Christianity, and I believe that there are a lot of people for whom it is beneficial for there to be church as it's currently understood. That doesn't mean that I believe the way church is currently posited by so many people is what church ought to, quote, look like, end of quote. It's my belief that there are a lot of people who are very confused about ecclesia, about exkaleo, about the church, about the called out together. I believe that Christians are to meet. I believe that that's true, and I must tell you that I don't do that nearly as much as I'd like to these days. I do it, but not as much as I'd like to, and not in the ways that I'd like to at this point. That being said, I don't necessarily believe the church is how that works. All of this considered, though, the point is you as a believer should not lose your discipleship per se, but you should move to other positions that are less positions of you being, quote, under another individual. In fact, I somewhat question the idea for many people of being under others. I'm not saying it's necessarily harmful that they do that, but I am saying that many people are harmed by virtue of the fact that they do not prove what it is that others are saying to them, and that they act in ways that are inappropriate as a result of that which they are taught. That's a reality for Christianity. So I think that what really needs to be expressed here is discipleship is fine. I think it's an okay thing. I think it's a good thing. I think that you need to be discipled. I think that's particularly true when you're younger. I think it still happens when you're older, maybe to a lesser extent. Apostleship or teachership, whatever you want to call it, elderhood, and various other things I think are important, and I think that we need to come to the place where that's what we are to others. And that's very important. Okay, so I think I'm about done with my video for the day. I hope you've gotten a little something out of it, particularly my Christian friends. Again, today is Tuesday, March the 6th of 2021. That means tomorrow will be Wednesday, March the 17th. I'm sorry, 16th if I said 6th. 16th of 2021. Tomorrow will be Wednesday, the 17th of March of 2021. Thanks to everybody who's been on Rumble, on the podcast, and YouTube. I may have forgotten to say this, but this is the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I am Kurt. Welcome. Thanks to everybody who's coming on Rumble, on the podcast, and on YouTube. And again, the subject of today's little video has been Disciple and Apostle. And tomorrow I will talk about Crown Jewel, which is going to be an interesting little subject because I think that it talks about something that a lot of people have failed at to understand. Have failed to understand. Okay, hope you're having a good day. It's a beautiful day here, getting towards the middle of the week very quickly, and I need to wrap this up and get on with other things. Hopefully we will see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Tuesday, the 16th of March of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.